Excellent. So first off, I want to welcome everybody. My name is Aaron Ward. I am a senior cloud strategist here at Planet Technologies. And today we are really looking forward to being able to share some of the things that we've experienced at Ignite and really recapping what we feel is some of the top highlights within our organization, what our organization saw within Ignite. I do have two presenters with us, Miguel Wood, who is our data architect, and also Adam Oakes, who is one of our cloud architects. Now, just real quick here, as we're going through from the YAOI Own It team, the team itself is actually fairly large. We have Bob Ballard, who is one of the senior cloud strategists, Jerry Martin, another cloud strategist, myself, George Scott Dowling, and then Mary Tucker, who is pivotal in coordinating and ensuring that information gets out to everybody. She's our true quarterback for the YAOI Own It series. And then, of course, Steve Winter, who is the Vice President of our State and Local Government East region. So we first off want to welcome everybody that is joining us within this presentation. One of the things I want to make sure that you know is that you can reach out to any of the experts that you saw on that list by sending an email to youriownit@go-planet.com. This enables you to ask questions either post or post presentation, or if there's future things that you would like to ask questions about, that email will actually hit everybody that is within the owners of the YAOI Own It program, including myself. So with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce both Miguel Wood and Adam Oakes to our virtual presentation layer. So Miguel, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and take over the presentation and give an Ignite recap from your viewpoint.
Great, thank you, Aaron. I appreciate that. My name is Miguel Wood, and I am a data architect with Planet Technologies. I am also a Microsoft Certified Master and Solutions Master within SharePoint, as well as working on the SQL team. And I really, when I was taking a look at the content that would, and specifically around the announcements that were shown in Ignite 2019, there were definitely some key points that were I really felt that were important. Specifically, we have really the new version, if you will, of what's known as Azure SQL Data Warehouse. And that's going to be now known as Azure Synapse Analytics. I'll probably, and I imagine most people will simply just refer to it as Azure Synapse. And then the second piece, although not 100% data driven or data related, is the Azure Arc, which is a component or series of technologies that will allow for management of multi-cloud on-prem resources all through the Azure portal. Both of these are in private preview. I will have links in the presentation as to how to get into the private preview or request access to the private preview. As such, there's only really, even within Azure Synapse, there's only one piece that is truly GA, which is really the SQL Data Warehouse Gen 1 or Generation 1, sometimes referred to. After that, I'll turn the time over to the awesome Adam, and he'll take over on Power Automate and Project Cortex as well. That were announced and previewed within Ignite. Having said that, let me just go ahead and jump into Azure Synapse or Azure Synapse Analytics. Again, I want to make sure that everyone kind of understands this is really the new name for the Azure SQL Data Warehouse that we had previously. And so when we kind of define it, it is, from a Microsoft perspective, it is basically a limitless analytics service. It means that it's going to scale out, and we'll talk about that because it'll be a very large platform that can scale out and up, that brings together both enterprise data warehousing as well as the big data analytics. And it's composed really of four primary components. Those components are going to be called SQL Analytics, Spark, again in preview, data integration, and that's allowed to bring your data and actually merge data wherever it may be, as well as the Studio, which is a user experience for working with this data. I will mention, and again, I've put all this in this slide, is that everything except the SQL pool under SQL Analytics is under preview, still under private preview, and not available. So, or only available to select few. I'm going to get into specifics because you will see the enhancements prior to Ignite, Azure Synapse was kind of referred to as Azure SQL Data Warehouse Gen 2. I don't like that because that's really just the SQL Analytics piece, but again, that's the thing. Again, at the bottom of this presentation, on this slide specifically, you can actually access or request access to go ahead and utilize those preview features that are there and available, especially from a SQL Analytics perspective. So when we take a look at that, I want to make us basically to understand the big picture, if you will. Think of being able to bring the enterprise data warehousing and the big data analytics with a unified experience to basically ingest, prepare, manage, and basically serve that data for immediate business intelligence and or machine learning needs, whether that be for apps and insights within the environment.
Hey, Miguel,
yes.
I need you to take over the presentation. No one's seeing your slides.
Oh, no one. I'm literally going through. Oh, I apologize. I have gone through. Let me take control.
Yes, thank you.
I apologize. I am actually on slide 8, so I've been scrolling through here, and I thought I'd been presenting. So let me go back really quick, just a couple. There is the first slide that I was mentioning, and thank you very much, Aaron, where we actually define what Azure Synapse or Azure Synapse Analytics as a full name is, and then the 4 pieces. There, now everyone should be able to see that preview link, and I'm surprised no one stopped me saying, "What do you mean? There's no preview link on that slide." So this is where you go ahead and request that access at that link as well. And then the 4 components. Keep in mind, SQL Analytics, the very top component has 2. And we're going to get into what those DW, the data warehouse units actually are used for, and specifically because it drives cost, as well as you'll see the SQL pool, which is provision, and then basically on demand, which is going to be your Gen 2 that we talk about. That's currently still in preview, if you will. Having said that, please let me know if I'm on the next slide where it actually has the ingest, store, prep, and train, model, and serve to the apps and insights. So making sure everyone can see that as well. So keep in mind, when we're actually taking a look at the big picture, we take, especially dealing with cloud data solution, this data is ingested into the big data stores. And we're going to obviously talk about making sure what is the best practices near the end of this this segment for using Azure Synapse. Obviously, we'll be talking about Azure storage because it's going to be right there and near the engines that are there. Once it's in the big data store, then Hadoop or Spark or machine learning algorithms can then prepare and train that data. When the data is ready for the complex analysis, then we can use Polybase, which is Transact SQL base, to query the big data stores and again bring the data into SQL Analytics tables, or really when we start talking about the data warehouse. Keep in mind again, just as we know, and if everyone's familiar with the classic OLAP or analytic processing or data warehousing, you do know that the SQL Analytics stores that data in relational tables with columnar storage. This format it reduces that the data storage costs and improves the query performance. So remember, we don't think in classic OLTP architecture when we're dealing with data warehouses. We're basically creating models that are very, very fast in the query, and that's going to obviously drive some of the best practices when we're designing our tables for this. Now, one of the things I've mentioned, and one of the things that we defined it as, is that limitless architecture. Well, how do we achieve that limitless architecture, or how does Microsoft achieve that limitless architecture? And this is really when we start talking about the massively parallel processing engine. And so what we see is you see these compute nodes, and those compute nodes can basically be scaled out, added to, and either scaled out or scaled up, and back down. Really, when it boils down to it, there's really 2 pieces, and really 2 pieces of cost as well. And I do want to concentrate on that slightly here, making sure that we understand that. One is we have storage. So there is going to be a storage cost. Depending on what type of storage we have, that will be one cost. The other cost will be the compute cost. In other words, for this MPP engine or massively parallel processing engine, what is the compute cost for all these nodes? Notice that there is a control node that really the users and the applications will connect to and then go ahead and be driven to each of the compute nodes as necessary. So the SQL Analytics then leverages a scale-out architecture to basically distribute the computational processing across these multiple nodes. The unit of scale that we'll talk about in the next couple slides here is that data warehouse unit, or DWU, and basically that's just it's a unit of compute that we basically will see that's a CPU, memory, and I/O. And again, Gen 1 and Gen 2 have some very different capabilities, and we'll talk about those in a little bit more in a little bit more detail here. So because we have this node-based architecture, as I mentioned, the applications or the users will connect just using transact SQL commands to a control node, which is that single point of entry for the SQL Analytics. And all it does, that control node simply runs the actual MPP engine, which then optimizes the queries for whichever node that they're going to pass that operation to, the compute node, that is. So they can even do their work in parallel. The compute nodes do store all the user data in Azure storage and run the parallel queries. And then that DMS that you see on this screen here, that's the data movement service, is an internal system service that moves that data between the nodes. If you'll notice that there's actually the connection between the DMS or the compute nodes at the DMS, so that those things can run those queries in parallel and return the accurate results. So keep in mind, because of that, because we have the decoupled storage and compute, that allows for us to independently size the compute power, irrespective of the storage. We can grow and shrink computer power simply by adding additional compute nodes within a SQL pool without moving any data. And then, of course, here's the very, very powerful thing, because we're talking about compute, and compute is arguably the most expensive resource in cloud. We can also pause compute capacity while leaving the data intact. So you're only paying for the storage when it's not in use. And that's going to be a very, very critical piece that I'll key in on for maintaining or at least controlling costs. And then, of course, resume the compute capacity during operational hours, basically pausing and resuming. So I mentioned the DWUs, or data warehouse units, which are the compute. So the SQL pool represents that collection of resources. Those resources are simply a combination of CPU, memory, and I/O. And that is what's called the DWU. However, it is even though we have DWUs for both Gen 1 and Gen 2 SQL pools, and think of Gen 2 as that on demand, whereas Gen 1 is that we have this situation where the second one is actually called a compute DWU, and so it's referred to differently. I've put the EG here on this slide specifically. If you are using either PowerShell or some type of API, as well as, or other notes, this is just the notation that you would see when specifying those measures. I'll go into more detail in some of these differences between these two in just a few minutes, so keep that in mind. I think that's fairly straightforward. So obviously the compute power is going to be critical, but I want to make sure that you understand that this is definitely separate from storage. The other thing that you'll see, the different DWUs, Gen 1 and Gen 2, you'll see them referred to as two different terms. You'll see them either as performance tier or service level tier. And so I want to make sure that we understand that you'll see that documentation, that terminology within most documentation that's being provided by Microsoft. I will also point out that a lot of the current documentation, because this is so new, a lot of the documentation, especially around design and so forth, is still based off of Gen 1 or the classic Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Some of those things are very useful and should be not, if you will, not ignored, but utilized in your design and architecture activities. So as I mentioned, there's the DWU in Gen 2 and the CDWU in Gen 2. So what happens if I want Gen 1 and I want to go to Gen 2? If I have currently a SQL data warehouse SQL pool, if you desire to go ahead and upgrade to Gen 2, and by the way, one of the main reasons you want to upgrade to Gen 2 is that Gen 1 had a larger or minimum compute tiers. So you were paying more even if your data, you didn't have that lot of data. So if you want to go ahead and definitely move down or scale down your DWU and therefore your compute cost, or simply move up to Gen 2, which I'll give a couple other reasons you may want to do that as well. You are able to upgrade from Gen 1 to Gen 2 at no additional cost, as long as the region, in the regions where it's currently available. It's not available in all regions, so you do need to make sure of that. The Azure Pricing Calculator, I hope everyone's aware of that, usually provides the accurate availability of these resources in the regions, in their respective regions. Gen 2, as I mentioned, that's at CWU. It does provide the best query performance and highest scale. I will tell you, if you're using a Gen 2 SQL pool, each resource class gets 2.5 times more memory than Gen 1. Why would that be important? Well, because we're going to actually have caching. So there is a significant amount of performance or query performance increase. It also provides the highest scale, but it does use a local disk-based cache on the compute nodes to improve performance. What does that mean? So this is where you actually have to have the give and take. If I pause that Gen 2 SQL pool, the system basically invalidates the cache because I've actually deallocated, if you will, that resource, that compute resource, and so the disk cache is now gone. So when I hydrate or restart that system, there is going to necessarily be a period where they call it warming, but the cache is basically warmed back up and populated before you actually receive the optimal performance you may have had prior. So the big thing that I mentioned, obviously, in the upgrade is that you also have the ability to scale these capabilities down to smaller compute tiers, as low as 100 CDW, which is significant. Okay. So how do I actually go ahead then and find out what the best DWU is for a specific workload? Well, these steps actually comes directly from Microsoft, and they're still the same steps we use for Gen 1 as well. But it is dependent on the workload and the amount of data that's loaded in the system. Okay. So the idea that Microsoft provides, or the recommendations that Microsoft provides, is that you start small and grow it because it's very easy to scale up. Again, we're very easy to do that. You want to monitor your application performance as the data loads into the system, and you're testing that. Hopefully you're testing that while you're actually doing that. You do want to notice or observe the number of DWU selected compared to the performance observed, and then basically kind of do a matching, if you will. There is, just like any other data platform system, whether it's OLTP or OLAP, please make sure that you're planning for or architecting for those periods of peak activity. For instance, if I'm doing a significant amount of reporting near the end of the month, you may want to scale that up and scale that out, or scale that up during those periods. So if you're running into query performance, you please keep this in mind. Query performance doesn't increase with larger resources. It actually increases with more parallelization if the work can be split into compute nodes. If it can. If it can't, then obviously I have to go ahead and up the resources, and that's going to affect your cost. Again, always keeping in mind in cost and maximizing the cost for your efficiency. So if you find that scaling is not changing your performance, then you may want to go back and take a look at your table design and or your query design. And I will again give a couple things here in the next 3 slides I have on this. One thing I did not mention, I don't know whether Aaron did. If anyone does have any questions on this, if there's a question, please let us know, and I know we'll answer that. So how do we actually, what's the suggested process for designing the Azure Synapse Analytics, again, or data warehouse? The funny thing is, even though this comes directly from the documentation from Microsoft, this hasn't changed between Azure SQL Data Warehouse Gen 1 or Gen 2, which of course is Azure Synapse. So load your data as fast as possible into a staging table. Limit the data movement when you group by and join tables, okay? Optimize your table for read performance with the right indexing. I'm going to get to those specific indexing, just give a couple brief pieces here. Partitioning. When dealing with partitioning, improve performance when you filter on the partition key. And usually that's going to be, in the majority of cases, it's going to be the date, of course, on that date dimension. And help manage the data lifecycle. And then minimize the disruption for your business users on incremental loads, so you're not taking and loading the data, remember, into the storage system. I guess the one of the main things that you want to, oops, I didn't mean to go forward, but keep in mind that you want to prioritize first your queries and transformations in SQL Data Warehouse, and then second on your incremental loads. So keep that as your priority when actually doing this. So what are the recommendations? And unfortunately, there's a lot of recommendations, but these are the biggest bullet points. And again, if you've been working with data warehousing or OLAP in any form for a long period of time, a lot of this, especially with the modern SQL platform, this is going to be not new information, other than a couple of things I referenced as far as storage. Again, you should always be designing your tables based on types of operations, no matter what type of data platform that is. On the data migration, as I mentioned, you want to load the data first into Azure Data Lake Storage or Azure Blob Storage, and then use the Polybase to load data into staging tables. Get it there first, and then do the staging tables using Polybase. When deciding on whether to distribute replicated tables, use replicated for small dimension tables in star schema, very small or less than 2 gigabytes of storage after compression. And then, of course, round robin for temporary staging, or hash for fact tables or large dimension tables. Again, these are already known and fairly straightforward. When indexing tables, when you have small tables and small lookups or temporary and staging tables, use heap. Use a clustered index for tables up to 100 million rows, or large tables that are only having one or two columns that are heavily used. Of course, the default is the clustered column store index, or CCI, and that's for large tables of more than 100 million rows. Now, here's the thing. If I've got smaller tables, or I'm only using 1 or 2 columns, I want to take it away from that default and change it to either heap or clustered index, respectively. As I mentioned before on the partitioning, and most people would agree, that should be done or considered with extremely large, and that's 100 billion rows. And again, when you're doing that, partition key should typically be based on the date dimension. In the majority of cases, I mean, it's very, very rarely that you would have something else, and it's situations that are very rare. For the incremental load, I mentioned this again previously 3 slides ago. Make sure you allocate larger resource classes to loading your data, especially when loading tables with the CCI, which of course is the default. Maintain your statistics. All right, right now, auto statistics are not generally available. So you will need to manually maintain your statistics. If you don't do that, especially as significant changes happen, you know what's going to happen to your query plans. There's no way that those things can be optimized unless you're maintaining the statistics. Statistics are what's going to drive those query plans and optimize those query plans. Resource groups, use those as a way to allocate memory to queries. If more memory is actually needed, allocate higher resource classes. However, using larger resource classes does impact concurrency. Remember that parallelism, it's either parallelism or scaling up the compute nodes. And finally, I think one thing that I've been hitting on several times because it is important, one of the biggest features of this is the ability to manage now separately from storage your compute resources. Pause that SQL pool when not in use. However, keeping in mind that Gen 2, to get that optimal to utilize that optimal local disk cache for your queries, you will need to ensure that you have sufficient time to rehydrate that cache so that you can get to the optimal performance level of your queries. So keep that in mind when actually ramping those or unpausing or restarting those resources, those compute resources.
So Miguel, we are at the halfway point.
Yes, sir.
And want to make sure that we have enough time for what you have and then also what Adam has. So just
Perfect.
wanted to give you a heads
I'm on
up.
my last slide of Synapse. I'm going to go to Arc. So thank you very, very much. I appreciate that, Aaron. And really, the last thing, of course, is for this, it would be the optimizing the architecture for the performance. Again, we talk about ensuring that SQL data warehouse does not change as far as architecture needs based on the queries that you have. There really are two different pieces here. Consider using the SQL database and the Azure Analysis Services in the hub and spoke architecture. These have not changed from Gen 1 to Gen 2 as far as architecture recommendations. And that kind of is our Azure Synapse Analytics overview. I am going to move directly over into Azure Arc, and there's only a very few number of slides here on this. I'm going to kind of go through this because, again, this also is in complete private preview. So when we talk about what Azure Arc, it's basically three pieces here. Organizing and governing all of your resources, whether on-premises, multi-cloud, across all environments, managing your apps, especially Kubernetes apps at scale, and then running data services anywhere. And that's really only the piece that really deals with data here, is that data services anywhere. Again, this was all announced, and you've probably seen the Azure Stack and seen that for many years now from Microsoft. What does this look like? It basically allows for you to manage, whether it's AWS, whether it's local data center, whether it's Azure, to manage all your resources with one location. What does it look like today? Well, I have Azure, I've got Azure Security Center, I've got Log Analytics, Azure Update Service. I've got locally, I've got my physical and or virtual servers, and I may have in other cloud providers virtual servers as well. Right now, I'm using ARM to only manage, and that's Azure Resource Manager, to manage my Azure VMs. So what would it look like if I were to use ARM or Resource Manager to manage those? I really would, at that point, basically map or project objects within the Resource Manager to then manage from one place, one pane of glass, all of my resources, no matter where they reside. What does that allow for me to do? It allows for me to use all the things that Resource Manager has: identity, RBAC, policies, tags, across all of my resources wherever they reside, whether it's on-premises, AWS, Azure, etc. Now you'll notice for Azure's, we've got these guest agents for the Azure VMs, but for on-prem or multi-cloud or other cloud resources, we've got hybrid agents, and I do want to go ahead and mention that. So again, private preview is available, but I want to go ahead and show some of the screenshots they had so you kind of see exactly what this is. This is the Azure portal. This is a resource group called RGVMs, as you can see. And what's the difference is you've actually got multiple machines here that are showing, the ones that are in red are the ones that are Azure Arc being managed. However, they do not reside in Azure, but I am going to manage them from Azure. So this would be looking at the list of resources. Those resources reside both in Azure and AWS, as well as on-prem. I go and select one that's sitting on-prem in a data center, this WinCore HR Utah, and you'll notice I have all the abilities I would have for the resource. I can do tags, overview, manage the access with Azure Active Directory, and even assess compliance, which is what I've drilled into on this one, or at least showed on this particular one, where you can go in and actually handle all the policies and ensure that it's compliant with all your other resources. And finally, with the last pieces is really being able to then go ahead and run your Azure data services anywhere. The architecture basically is very similar. We have these agents that are running. We use Azure Data Studio, Azure Portal, and the CLI, and being able to basically use that to manage our Kubernetes applications. And that is basically going to cover up Azure Arc and using the Azure Resource Manager to manage all your resources, wherever they may be. I'll turn the time over to Adam.
Thanks, Miguel. My mic was muted. Azure Arc is definitely really cool. I'm excited to see the implications of where it grows. I was actually spending some time when I was at Ignite with a couple customers who are in the process of going into a cloud world. And as they're in the process of going to that cloud world, something like Azure Arc that's basically going to open up all of the different Azure app services, whether it's automation, whether it's updates, things like that, just the logging side of it is a really, really cool concept and something that's going to, potentially open up a lot of possibilities for them. I'm actually having a problem getting the content displayed on my team side, so I can't take control of the presentation. Miguel, would you mind going forward whenever I say next slide as we go through and kind of controlling it for me if you're all right with that?
Yes, I can do that. I was on mute too.
Okay, cool. So we'll start on the Power Automate slide. So first, guys, my name's Adam. I am a cloud architect here. I handle our managed services both on Office 365 and Azure. I'll try to stay fairly succinct as we go through this. Like Miguel, both of the features I'm going to kind of be highlighting today and some of the cool new stuff coming to Power Automate, which is just a renamed version of Flow, as well as whenever we get into probably my favorite announcement of Ignite, which is Project Cortex, are in preview right now. So I'll try to give you some understanding of when they're going to come on. But what we're really trying to do with this update is just show you some of the cool new things coming in the future. So Power Automate, as I said, is realistically just Microsoft Flow renamed. Flow has always lived in what they call the Power Platform. So Power BI, Power Apps, there's a new one called Power Virtual Agents. They're basically just renaming Flow so it fits the same mold and is easier to identify where it falls in the product set. So if you've been using Flow before, great, that's awesome. It's basically the same thing with some cool new features coming in. If you haven't used Flow before, I'm going to do a high-level overview of it today so you kind of guys get an understanding of what it is. The big thing that's new related to Power Automate is what they're going to call UI flows. So I will get into that as we go through the presentation and kind of talk about it, but it's this really cool new feature, and both of the things we're going to talk about today are really kind of showing the power of not only automation, but really how AI can come in and do some amazing stuff for us. So if you don't mind popping to the next slide, Miguel. So as I said, Power Automate is ultimately still Flow. It's built off the idea of triggers and actions. So in general, how Flow works is it's kind of like old school workflows if you did SharePoint back in the day, but something happens that triggers automation and you build out a logic flow of actions based on that trigger. So a common trigger is you can hit a button inside the Power Automate app on your mobile device. One of my favorite personal ones, I always hated if you wake up in the morning and you're sick. And for me, for the longest time, that was then, all right, well, I need to get up. I need to go turn on the laptop. I need to email my boss and let him know that I'm not feeling well. I'm probably not going to work today. I need to put up an out-of-office message and explain what's going on. And so you wake up and you feel like junk, and then you have to spend 20 minutes organizing stuff so you can go back to bed. So I actually built out Power Automations that from a button on my mobile phone I could click, and it would send an email to my boss for me and go in and set my out-of-office message. So I could basically just, I feel really bad today. I don't think I'm going to make it in. And so for those, 1 or 2 times a year that happens, I could basically hit the button on my phone and roll back over in bed. There's a whole bunch of other stuff you can do too. You guys can see the little picture on there. A tweet can be a good example of a trigger that kind of makes stuff go through. And items added to SharePoint, something like that is good examples. And then you just build the automation behind it. Next slide, Miguel. So right now, Power Automate has about 275, a little over 275 actually, connectors built into them. This is stuff like OneDrive and Outlook, but it's also stuff like all the different apps you can do in the G Suite, or Salesforce is a great example, or Trello, depending on the different services that you go through and use. You can basically go in and integrate with these third-party apps or Microsoft apps and give you more options as you can go through and build in automation into your services. This is Microsoft trying to open up Power Automate to bring automation to business processes to save you money and save you resources. If you have stuff right now where your user base or your employees are going through and doing stuff manually, well, potentially in Power Automate, you might be able to save some time and get them working on more valuable uses of their time than repetitive tasks. What's really going to take this to the next level, as you go through and look at where you're going in the future with this idea of UI flows, as I said, it's really going to open up the possibility of old legacy apps or apps that currently don't have those connectors that are reaching into Power Automate itself. So one more slide, Miguel. So UI flows is based off of the idea of robotic process automation. When you go through and you look at robotic process automation, which I'm just going to call it RPA after this, it's basically the idea of going through and teaching the system what you're doing inside of any sort of application that you're using and allowing it to go through and repeat the tasks that you're doing. So up until now, if I wanted to go do something, and this is not exactly what it's meant for, but it'll help visualize it. Say I was doing something inside of my email and I had a set task that I was doing where I go and I clicked on a certain email and I dragged it somewhere, and then I went through and I added a signature to it or maybe added a categorization from my Outlook. If I was doing the same steps over and over again, I could basically use RPAs, get it to watch what I'm doing on my screen with my mouse and my clicks and things like that, and basically get it to go through and add automation into that automatically for me. And so what this really is going to open up the possibility for legacy agencies and legacy applications is you're going to be able to go in and you're going to actually be able to build in automation into what you're doing. So with these old applications that maybe you didn't have an API that you could go into, or maybe you didn't have a way to connect to these other services, you can basically tell UI flows through RPA, watch my screen, watch the actions that I do, and then build an automation around that. So all these old legacy applications that up until now you haven't been able to integrate in with what you're doing around this automation is potentially going to open the door to you to be able to do that. It's a really, really, really cool concept. Next slide, Miguel. Same as how Flow's always been, you actually don't need to code. You don't have to put developer effort behind this. One of the attractive things that's always existed inside of Flow, which is, again, now Power Automate, is the idea that this is something that's user-driven and user-focused. So if you have an application that you go in and work in and you click through and you do stuff, if you spend some time understanding how RPAs work and understanding how Power Automate is built, this is something you can go through to take work off of your plate to make things easier. I've done a whole bunch of really, really cool stuff with Flow over the last couple of years with, partners that I've worked with, doing stuff like automating, the ordering of business cards, where someone can fill out a form in SharePoint that, they want to order some business cards, and then sending it to different levels for approval, for verify that all the information is correct, to send it out for ordering, everything like that can basically all be automated. And so again, doing this now where RPAs are going to open it up where you can reach out into content that didn't have that native integration before, it's really, really cool. And to me, this is one of the neater things that kind of came out of Ignite, and the sense that this is a way you're starting to really see the power of machine learning and kind of the future where Microsoft is trying to drive with some of this content. Is they're really trying to open it up so that regardless of what system you're using, regardless of what technology you're using or what applications you're using, some of the cool things that they are implementing in the cloud that uses AI and uses machine learning can really go a long way to help take some of that work off your plate and really make you focus on the stuff that's truly value add and again, not that repetitive process. One more slide, Miguel. I'm not going to read through all of the next slide. You guys can go through. Y'all have our presentations. Y'all can go through and look at the slides, or you can you go back and look at the recording. This is just stuff built off talking about Power Automate and some of the stuff that it can do. But again, it's just reiterating that really, if you have legacy applications, this is a ginormous update for you and something that can do a lot of value inside of your organization around automation. So next slide, we should be on the introducing Project Cortex slide. Again, I can't see, so I'm hoping we're there. So now I want to talk about what was probably my favorite update that came out at Ignite. So as you're going through and you're looking, Project Cortex is a new application that was actually announced whenever Office 365 came out. Or whenever, for a new application to come to Office 365, is actually driven by two people that I've gotten the pleasure to know over time, by Chris McNulty and Naomi Moneypenny. Both of them have been with Microsoft for a bit of time, and Naomi's college experience was actually built in artificial intelligence and figuring out what to do there. And so what you're going to see with Project Cortex, which is, again, an actual new application that's coming out, this is slated for a March 2020 release, is really going to be taking the power of machine learning and AI to the next level. This was kind of my eyes got big when I saw this moment, because when you see the way that this is kind of being built and how they're targeting some of the growth in there, this is really transforming the data that your agency will be using day in and day out and empowering your users with that data. So next slide. So Project Cortex basically uses AI to process content inside of your agencies and inside of your systems. This is one of those cases where the more things you're using inside of Office 365, the better and more intelligent Project Cortex is going to be. Basically, as you have data in SharePoint, as you have data in Teams, even as you have videos and streams, as you have conversations in Teams, all of that data can be processed internally inside of your Office 365 tenant. Basically empowered, where it will start grouping stuff into different categories that your users and your employees can use to gather information. And as you're going to be able to actually see how it's doing this. I have some GIFs that are incorporated in the presentation, but it's basically going to take the data you have and empower it to make it more meaningful and bring together correlations you maybe didn't even know that you had. It's really, really cool when you see it in action. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Miguel. So one of the things that you can do with Project Cortex is you can actually go in, you can upload files, and you can actually teach it some of the important information. So if you look at the screenshot that I have, I don't know if you guys can see it, I know it's a little small, but this is basically an example of a purchase order, and they've gone through and highlighted metadata fields inside of it. So a big part of how this is going to work is it identifying metadata that matters and going through and being able to pull that information together. And one of the ways that you can kind of build the strength of what Project Cortex is doing is by doing form processing. Some of it is done automatic. So if you go through and you walk through a couple of these purchase orders and show it what to do, you can then give it another purchase order and it will know how to go through and identify the information that's important. And so you'll go through and you process the forms, it will do the image and text recognition, and then again, you're teaching the machine, so it's going to get better, and the AI is going to get stronger over time as you're building it. And again, next slide, Miguel. The whole idea coming through, and I realize right now I'm just kind of setting everything up, is the idea of just-in-time knowledge and expertise for your users. So I kind of mentioned how metadata is going to be so important, but basically as it's going through and aggregating this data that's going to be inside of your files, it's going to be inside of your email, going to be inside of your Teams, and like I said, even videos, it's going to basically be going through and building a repository of information to really make that data work for you. And you'll be able to actually start to see it coming together when we go to the next slide. So again, this is the first real thing, and hopefully the GIF's moving on the presentation for you guys. But this is the idea of a topic card. So topic cards are basically the first level of detail that you get with Project Cortex. So as you can see in the GIF, if it is moving, the first topic card that's pulling up is related to this project core in the example they're doing. So basically they've gone through and they've taught the system and taught Project Cortex that there's a project called core. When you hover over the word core in the document, and this is just a Word document, it brings up a topic card. It says what the project's about, has information relating to what the acronym is. It tells you some of the users inside of your organization that are actually working on the project. So if you need to know who you need to get to, their information is being pulled down from Azure AD. Shows you resources that have been uploaded into Office 365, and also has key dates and information pulled in. And again, all of this is being aggregated over both the files that have been uploaded to this project, but as well as potentially, like maybe you uploaded a statement of work that had, due dates and things like that. And again, through machine learning and through you going through and working with the system, it's able to pull together some of this useful information. So as you guys can start to see, as you're building out this repository of knowledge, this is something that then becomes integrated with the Office applications for your users. So imagine you're going through and you're working on a document and typing it up, and if you see something that identifies as a topic related to information in your company, it's just, again, a highlight where you can highlight or hover your mouse over that system, and all this information is going to be coming up to pulling in details for you. So next slide, Miguel. So another example of this is people card. So we actually have Miguel Garcia on the screen as an example of a user, but it actually is kind of parallel to what the topic cards are, where people cards are built out that basically are going to share information of what the users inside of your organization are doing. So imagine if this was Miguel Wood instead of Miguel Garcia. If we had been fully adopted on a Project Cortex, I could go in and I could see the reporting structure of who Miguel reports up to. I could see files he's working on. And one of the cool things is it actually lets you curate your own information. So you can see they have an Ask Me About section where they're talking about different strengths and stuff that it has. So I've worked with Miguel for a while. I know he's amazing with big data, with SQL, with SharePoint. He's able to talk about queries and things that just completely go over my head to me. Well, Miguel could go in and build out his people card to put that type of information. And as a new employee comes in, if they decide, hey, I really need to find someone that knows SQL, you could go in there and find the employees that have that as a strength of them listed out. So rather than you having to go through and talk to everyone and figure out, oh, who could potentially help me out with this? Do you know someone I could ask? You're potentially building in that own repository of knowledge and information inside of your own organization. And it's really, really cool when you see some of the stuff that's going. Now, I know I'm going to get the question. I have this slide later on. But as you've seen with other intelligent built Microsoft documents, rest assured it is only exposing information that the user has access to. So say Miguel is going through and he's working on 10 different projects, but 3 of those projects have to happen to be sensitive and have information that you're not necessarily wanting to expose to everyone else in the company. Well, if I as an employee go in and look at Miguel, it's not going to show me any documents that are sitting in SharePoint sites or team sites that I do not personally have access to. So it's not going to reveal information to me that it shouldn't. It's only going to show stuff that is, I have access to and I have the ability to see. So next one. Again, hopefully that you guys will actually be able to see this. This is another one of the GIF ones. So we talked about the topic cards that come down. The topic cards ultimately get built out into a topic page. So we talked about the project core. If you were to go and click on that, that would bring you to a topic page that has everything related to that topic that you went through. This is essentially a central aggregate of knowledge for you to be able to go in and see related to what's going on inside of the system. So you can see as the GIF goes through, it's identifying all the people, all the different resources that are exposed here. It even built out this really cool structure that shows you how people and different information or projects are related. Again, it's doing that based off of permissions and what you've done in machine learning. And this is basically a landing spot for Project Cortex that's everything related to this core project that you were talking about earlier. So if I know, hey, I'm going to go through and I want to look up something on the core project, or I have a question about it, well, I have this landing page or this topic page that I can go in and I can find information out and build. And you can see there's even places you can go in and ask questions and look into information. So really, really cool. As again, if you're extrapolating this out, this is just going to be one topic page of many related to the different resources that Project Cortex builds out about your agency or about your organization. So next one, Miguel. So the topic pages themselves all roll up into what they call a knowledge center. So the knowledge center is basically the central repository for everything Project Cortex. So again, this is another GIF showing you an example of a knowledge center. The one thing that I think is cool is the knowledge center is again curated to the individual user. So you can go there and they do have stuff, as you can see, like trending topics. They have stuff like, a search that you can go through and do, but they even have stuff like the suggested for you, or they have stuff that again is going to be exposing stuff just specifically related to me and the information that I have access to inside of my organization. So what my knowledge center is going to look like is going to be different from what Miguel looks like, which is going to be different from what someone like Steve looks like. Steve is obviously going to probably have access to a lot more information than me, so his knowledge center might be a little bit more busy, whereas mine will be a little bit more targeted down into the specific projects and specific work that I am doing or I am advising on. So really, really cool as you see it kind of go through and build together. I'm so excited to see where they ultimately go with Project Cortex. It is a little Big Brother-ish. I think the natural reaction when we see all this is like, oh dang, it's kind of scary to see all that. But again, be rest assured. You can go to the next slide, Miguel. All the built-in security and workflows that you've come to expect from Microsoft 365 are at the heart of what they're building inside of Project Cortex. So I've already spoken a little bit about the boundaries of knowledge and the network inside of your organization. So not letting it expose to even other users of your same agency or other users of your same organization unless they have their permissions to it. You have the ability to go in and do stuff like rights protection or do stuff like AIP labeling, as you guys have probably seen some of the other enterprise features you have in 365. All of that is going to extend down and be able to sit on top of what you're doing inside of Project Cortex. So, you can go in and do encryptions, you can do classifications, you can do all that different type of labeling that you've come to expect in 365. And then finally, Project Cortex really enhances your security profile. So it's going through and automatically categorizing and tagging the content with metadata. But as you have that data categorized with metadata, it'll be much easier for you to go through and say, okay, well, this certain type of information is going to be compliant for me. I work with a lot of customers that have to be aware of NIST compliance. They're DoD contractors. And one of the things that's really important is you're going through and addressing what you need to do for NIST compliance. Well, certain information, especially certain types of information need to be handled much more securely than others. Well, how much is it going to help you if you're able to go through and work with this system to have it go in and automatically be classifying the metadata of the information that really matters to you? So if you know you're going in and you're dealing with stuff that has a secret security clearance level, if you can train it what to look for to know that type of stuff, so then if one of your users goes in and uploads a file, it can go in and learn on its own that this needs to have a certain classification labeling, that this is the type of information you need to not go out. Well, then as soon as your users are uploading files into your ecosystem, into your intranet, Project Cortex is adding the automatic labeling and the protection that comes with it. So as you build out and as you grow this AI and this machine learning, it's basically going to help you help yourself, because again, it's taking away some of those processes that have been so manual in the past and making it easier for you to be able to go through and do it. It's really, really cool when you see. One more slide, Miguel. The final thing I wanted to mention on Project Cortex, and I'm sure you guys can kind of tell I'm fairly excited for it, they actually even plan third-party integration with this. So again, as I said, it's coming in March. They believe it's coming to the public cloud in March 2020. One of the things I wanted to call out, though, if you're listening to this, Microsoft is currently accepting applications or requests to get into the public preview of this, or the private preview. So if you're going through and saying, I think this is really cool, I think there's cool stuff I can do in here, talk to us or talk to your Microsoft representatives. It might be something you can go through and you can help explore and help figure out what Microsoft is going to do, because I think this is going to be so powerful when it goes through. They're going to have all the new updates to search, which a ton of those came out inside of Ignite. I didn't have time to talk about that today, but even stuff like Salesforce or some of the Azure Data Lake Gen 2 stuff, some of the data repository things that Miguel was talking about earlier, that type of stuff is actually going to be able to be integrated through connectors and through information to pull in data into Project Cortex. So if you have a whole bunch of raw data, or again, Salesforce data in, you're able to pull that information in and help to build out the knowledge base of what you're doing inside of Project Cortex, which is really, really cool. And they're also planning on additional third-party connectors as well. And that's it for me, guys, as far as talking from the M365 side. I think both those are really cool. So hopefully you guys enjoyed your time. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Aaron.
Thank you so much, both Miguel and Adam. I really appreciate it. And by all means, everybody, please, if you have any questions, feel free to either unmute yourself and ask a question to either Miguel or Adam about the topics that were, actually any of the topics that were discussed, or potentially even other topics that you may have heard from Ignite that you would like our professional opinion about. Or if you want to use the chat window, please feel free to do that as well. I'll just give a quick little pause if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question. All right. So one of the things that I do want to make sure as we're wrapping up here in our last few minutes together is that at Planet, we are always looking at how we invest back into our customers. You notice here with your units, we have incredible engagements that enable our customers to really get into the cloud very effectively, whether it's utilizing Modern Workplace or Azure or even Dynamics. But one of the areas that our key focus has been is how do we continue to help our customers through some of the struggles that they may be experiencing by moving to cloud. And one of the investments that Planet has done is what we call GovCloud. And GovCloud is, if you go out to govcloud.com, you'll be able to see that we have secured cloud infrastructure and really providing a lot of our managed services for our customers, such as Azure Advantage. To give you just a little highlight of what Azure Advantage is, it provides realistically 3 different options. One is a phone support for any type of Azure-related infrastructure as a service questions that you might have or problems that you may have. We also have a phone a friend, which is having access to folks like Adam and Miguel or other architects that we have within our organization to be able to help you move forward with your cloud journey. And then, of course, we do provide true full support where we can be a complete managed service for your operating systems and that are running within Azure itself. So just so you're aware, is when we're thinking about some of the ongoing management, you have multiple choices. We can do email support, we can do data recovery, etc. But the benefit here is that these are significant significant investments that Planet is doing for our customers who are taking that journey into the cloud and do need that extensive, or not extensive, but additional assistance within your organization and leveraging Planet as an extension to your IT organization. So it's something I wanted to be able to share. With that, I wanted to make sure that I thank you, everybody that joined the call. This is recorded, so we will go ahead and post that up on our YAOI Own It site, so that way it could be reviewed in case there was something that you heard and you wanted to go back and listen to what either Miguel or Adam provided. And again, if you do have any questions, please feel free to email us at yaoiownit@go-planet.com. If there's not any questions, I don't see anything online. We do really appreciate the time that you gave us, and we hope that you have a wonderful week. Thank you.